Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
Family gatherings had always been a mix of forced smiles, passive-aggressive comments, and the constant reminder that I was the only one still single in my 30s. It wasn't that I minded being single. I actually liked my life just the way it was, but my family never let me forget that, to them, I was some sort of walking tragedy. My mother, of course, would give me the usual, "Oh, sweetheart, we just want you to be happy," while my aunts would pester me about my biological clock, as if my uterus was a ticking time bomb they all had a personal stake in. But none of them came close to Uncle Mike, the self-appointed king of family barbecues and, apparently, a stand-up comedian in his own mind. Mike had always been the loudest voice in the room, the one who loved an audience, the guy who couldn't just enjoy a meal without making someone the butt of his jokes. And today, like clockwork, I was his chosen target. The moment I arrived, he was already calling out across the yard with that smug grin that made my teeth clench. Well, look who finally decided to show up, he announced, holding up his beer like he was about to give a toast in my honor. Still single, huh? I was starting to think you might have found yourself a man and forgotten all about us. I forced a smile, the kind you put on when you're calculating just how much trouble you get in for throwing a drink in someone's face. Nope, still happily single, I replied, trying to keep my voice light, even as I felt the eyes of half my family on me. He wasn't done, though. He never was. Mike thrived on dragging things out, making sure everyone was listening, making sure that he was the center of attention. "Guess you'll die alone with your cats," he joked, his voice booming over the backyard as he laughed, clearly delighted with himself. Some of the family chuckled, while others awkwardly sipped their drinks, pretending not to hear. That was the thing with Mike. He got away with it because people let him, because it was easier to laugh along than to call him out. But today? Today was different. I tilted my head, letting the moment stretch just a little longer, just long enough for him to think he had one. Then I smiled, slow and deliberate, and said, "Well, at least my girlfriend didn't catch me cheating with her sister like yours did." Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just settle over a conversation, but smothers it entirely. The kind of silence that turns the air thick and suffocating, making it impossible to pretend like nothing just happened. Mike's face drained of color so fast you'd think I had just slapped him. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out, and for the first time in his life, he looked completely, utterly speechless. Aunt Linda, his wife, was staring at me with wide eyes, her hands gripping her drink so tightly I thought she might break the glass. Then, slowly, her gaze shifted to Mike. "What did she just say?" she asked, her voice eerily calm, too calm, the kind of calm that was way more terrifying than screaming. Mike stammered, shaking his head like he could somehow erase the words that had just come out of my mouth. "Babe, she's joking," he said, forcing a laugh that sounded about as natural as a car crash. "You know she likes to stir things up." But Linda wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at me, and I could see the questions forming in her mind, the wheels turning, the calculations being made. "Is that true?" she asked me directly, her voice firmer now, sharper. I took a slow sip of my drink, letting the moment drag out just a little longer. "Oh, you mean you didn't know?" I asked, feigning surprise. "Wow, that's awkward. I thought for sure you must have found out by now." I mean, it wasn't exactly a well-kept secret. The tension in the backyard was suffocating, the weight of 100 unsaid things pressing down on everyone in the space. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Even the people who had been chatting in the background had stopped mid-conversation, their attention now fully locked on the disaster unfolding before them. Mike took a step toward me, his face contorted with something between rage and desperation. "You need to shut the hell up," he hissed, voice low enough that only I could hear. I raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "Or what, Mike?" I asked, my voice just as quiet but twice as dangerous. "You gonna make a scene? Because I'd love to see how you explain this one away." He exhaled sharply, glancing around like a trapped animal looking for an escape route. But there was none. Not this time. Then Linda stood up. The sound of her chair scraping against the patio was the only thing breaking the silence, and when she straightened, there was something deadly in her expression. "Tell me right now," she said, her voice shaking, not from fear but from barely contained fury. "Is it true?" Mike swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing as he tried to form words. Any words, but nothing came out. The silence stretched. And then Linda threw her drink right in his face. Gasps erupted all around us as the beer splattered across his shirt, his face, dripping down his chin in sticky, pathetic rivulets. He didn't even wipe it away. He just stood there, frozen, looking like he had been punched in the gut. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of every judgmental comment he had ever thrown at me, every smirk, every joke at my expense, and for the first time in years, I felt absolutely no pressure to laugh along. I just smiled, took another sip of my drink, and watched the show. Mike stood there with beer dripping from his face, his expression a perfect mixture of humiliation, rage, and disbelief, while Linda stared at him like she was seeing him for the first time in her entire life. The silence was so thick it felt like the whole world had stopped turning for just a moment, the only sounds coming from the crackling of the grill and the distant laughter of neighborhood kids playing down the street, completely oblivious to the disaster unfolding in our backyard. Then, finally, Linda inhaled sharply, setting down her empty cup with slow, deliberate precision, like she needed to ground herself before she did something drastic. "Tell me the truth, Mike," she said, her voice eerily calm, the kind of calm that usually came right before a storm tore through everything in its path. "I want to hear it from your mouth." Mike, still stunned, wiped his face with the back of his hand, his fingers trembling slightly as he forced an awkward, uneasy chuckle that fooled absolutely no one. "Come on, babe," he said, attempting to sound casual, though his voice cracked on the last word, betraying him completely. "You're seriously gonna listen to her? She's just trying to stir up drama, you know how she is." I leaned back in my chair, swirling the last of my drink in my glass, letting the ice clink softly as I watched the train wreck unfold in real time. "Oh, you thought I wouldn't find out, Uncle Mike?" I asked, tilting my head slightly as I studied his face, watching him squirm under my gaze. "That trip to Vegas with the boys? Yeah, the only person fooled was you." Linda's eyes snapped back to me, and I could see the wheels turning in her head, her mind piecing things together faster than Mike could scramble to cover his tracks. The last time Mike had gone to Vegas, she had been suspicious then too, hadn't she? I remembered her complaining about how strange he had been acting, how he came home with a guilty conscience so heavy it practically seeped out of his pores, but he had smoothed things over with some expensive jewelry and an elaborate excuse, making her feel foolish for even questioning him. But now? Now, she wasn't feeling foolish. Now, she was feeling something else entirely. Mike's expression twisted into something uglier, his usual arrogance slipping as he realized he was losing control of the situation faster than he could contain it. "Jesus Christ, you're really doing this?" he hissed, lowering his voice as if that would somehow make this less of a spectacle than it already was. "You don't even know what the hell you're talking about." I smirked, tilting my glass slightly toward him as if in a mock toast. "Oh, I know plenty," I said, letting my words sink in, letting him feel the weight of them. "And so do a lot of other people, apparently." Linda turned to the rest of the family then, her eyes scanning every single face in the crowd, her voice sharp and unwavering when she asked, "How many of you knew?" Silence. Then, a few guilty expressions. A few eyes darting away, avoiding her gaze, pretending to be interested in their drinks or the pattern of the patio tiles beneath their feet. But the damage had been done. "Oh my God," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief, her hand clutching the side of the picnic table like she needed something to keep her from collapsing. "You all knew. You knew, and no one told me." I watched as the betrayal settled into her bones, watched as she realized that the family she had trusted for years had chosen silence over honesty, had let her play the role of the oblivious wife while they exchanged knowing glances behind her back. The worst part wasn't even the cheating itself, it was the sheer level of deception, The fact that people she loved and trusted had looked her in the eyes and said nothing. Mike tried again, reaching out to touch her arm, but she recoiled like his skin was toxic. "Linda, come on," he pleaded, his voice shaking now, the fear of losing everything creeping into every syllable. It wasn't what she's making it out to be, I swear." That was the last straw. Linda laughed then, a short, bitter sound that sent chills down my spine. "You're a liar," she said, her voice breaking, her body trembling with barely controlled fury. "You're a goddamn liar, Mike, and I can't believe I wasted so many years on you." From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. My cousin Jake, their son, who had been quiet through the whole ordeal, suddenly stepping forward, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. He was in his early 20s now, old enough to understand exactly what was happening, old enough to put the pieces together. "So that's why Mom was crying last Christmas?" he asked, his voice quieter than before, but carrying enough weight to slice through the air like a knife. Mike's face twisted, shame flashing across it before he could mask it with another weak excuse, but it didn't matter anymore. The damage was irreversible. The truth was out, and there was no putting it back in the box. Linda exhaled shakily, closing her eyes for a long moment, like she was trying to gather whatever strength she had left. And then, without another word, she turned and stormed off, leaving Mike standing there looking like a man who had just realized his entire world had collapsed right beneath his feet. For a brief second, he turned to me, his eyes filled with something between fury and desperation, like he wanted to blame me for everything, like I had personally unraveled his life instead of his own actions. I raised my glass one last time, taking a slow sip before setting it down with deliberate care. "Enjoy the rest of the barbecue, Uncle Mike," I said, my voice dripping with satisfaction. He didn't reply. He didn't move. He just stood there, motionless, as the rest of the family stared at him, some whispering, some shaking their heads, all of them realizing that the man they had once respected had just been exposed for the fraud he really was. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I had won. I thought the chaos was over. I had no idea how wrong I was. Mike was still standing there like a man who had just been hit by a truck, his entire world crumbling around him, while the rest of the family either looked at him in shock or avoided eye contact altogether, as if not acknowledging the disaster unfolding in front of them would somehow make it disappear. Linda was gone, storming inside the house, leaving nothing but destruction in her wake, and for a brief moment, I thought that was it, that the storm had passed, that the damage was done. But apparently, I had severely underestimated just how many skeletons were waiting to fall out of this family's closet. From somewhere near the patio table, a voice spoke up, a voice I hadn't expected to hear, a voice that cut through the suffocating silence like a blade. "Well, since we're airing out secrets today," Tom said, his tone sharp and deliberate, his words dripping with something that almost sounded like satisfaction. "Mike, you want to tell everyone about Dad's inheritance?" If it was possible for a man to physically shrink in real time, Mike did exactly that, his entire posture stiffening, his face paling even more than before, his eyes flicking toward Tom with barely contained panic. "What the hell are you talking about?" he shot back, his voice cracking slightly, his bravado from earlier completely gone, replaced with something that sounded an awful lot like desperation. Tom, who had been leaning casually against the side of the picnic table, straightened up, crossing his arms over his chest as he met Mike's gaze with an expression that could only be described as pure, unfiltered disgust. "Don't play dumb," he said, his voice unwavering, his words spoken with the kind of confidence that told me he wasn't just throwing accusations in the air, he had proof, and he knew it. "Dad's money. The money that was supposed to be split between all of us. You remember that, don't you? Or do you only remember the part where you stole more than half of it while the rest of us got scraps?" A stunned, collective gasp rippled through the family, a sound that was almost eerie in the otherwise silent backyard, and for the first time all evening, Mike actually looked terrified. He had been humiliated when I exposed his affair, sure, but he had still been scrambling, still fighting, still trying to find a way to spin it in his favor. Now? Now he looked like a man who had just realized he had no way out, no clever excuses, no easy escape. What the hell is he talking about? Jake demanded, his voice shaking with fury, his eyes burning with a kind of rage I hadn't seen before. He had already been disgusted with his father for cheating on his mother, already grappling with the realization that the man he had looked up to for years was nothing more than a lying fraud, but now, the anger radiating off him was almost palpable. So you cheated and robbed us? What else is there, huh? You got any more dirty little secrets you want to share while we're all here? Mike's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but nothing came out, no words, no excuses, no weak attempts at justifying his actions. He had nothing left. I should have known, Tom continued, shaking his head, his voice laced with bitter amusement, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I should have known you'd pull some shit like this, because that's just who you are, isn't it? You take, and you don't give a damn about who you hurt in the process. Mike's head snapped toward him, his face contorted with something between anger and panic, his last shred of dignity hanging on by a thread. That's not true, he spat, his voice raw, desperate, unconvincing. I didn't steal anything. Tom let out a humorless laugh, shaking his head as he reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone, tapping the screen a few times before holding it up for everyone to see. Really? He asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Because the bank statements say otherwise. You want me to read them out loud, Mike? Or do you want to explain why thousands of dollars went missing from Dad's estate and somehow ended up in your personal account? The backyard was so silent you could have heard a pin drop. Mike's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his body trembling with barely contained rage, but he didn't say anything. He didn't deny it. He didn't fight back. Because there was nothing left to fight for. Linda, who had been standing just inside the house, listening to every word, finally stepped forward, her face unreadable, her hands clenched at her sides. We're done, she said, her voice firm, unwavering, unshakable. I want a divorce. Mike's head snapped toward her, his expression crumbling, his panic reaching a boiling point. Linda, wait, but he never got the chance to finish his sentence, because before he could get another word out, Linda grabbed the nearest drink off the patio table and, without hesitation, threw it directly into his face. The backyard erupted into chaos. Mike stumbled back, gasping as the liquid dripped from his face, blinking rapidly, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to process what had just happened. Linda didn't even flinch, didn't hesitate, didn't offer him a second glance as she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving him standing there, soaked and humiliated, his reputation in tatters, his marriage destroyed, his carefully crafted facade shattered beyond repair. I watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction, sipping the last of my drink as the weight of the evening settled over me, the realization sinking in that I had started something much, much bigger than I had ever anticipated. I had thought my little moment of revenge would be the highlight of the night, that exposing Mike's affair would be the worst of it, but I had been wrong. This wasn't just about a cheating husband anymore. This was about years of lies, years of deception, years of hidden betrayals finally coming to the surface, and as I watched the fallout spread like wildfire, I couldn't help but wonder just how much deeper this went. I had no idea what was coming next, but I had a feeling it was going to be worse than anything I could have imagined. Mike stood there, soaked in whatever drink Linda had thrown in his face, looking like a man who had just lost everything in a matter of minutes. His usual smugness was gone, replaced with something raw and desperate, like he was still trying to convince himself that there was a way out of this mess, that he could somehow talk his way back into everyone's good graces. But there was no coming back from this, no smooth-talking excuse that could undo the damage, no pathetic apology that would erase the betrayal that had just been laid bare in front of the entire family. Still, because Mike was Mike, he tried. He wiped his face with the sleeve of his shirt, straightened his posture, and attempted to reclaim the confidence that had once made him the loudest voice at every family gathering. All right, everybody, let's just take a second here, he said, forcing a laugh that landed flat, his voice cracking under the weight of his own failure. This has clearly gotten way out of hand, and I think we all need to calm down before jumping to any conclusions. Linda turned back to him, and the look in her eyes made it abundantly clear that the only thing she wanted to jump to was a divorce lawyer. Jump to conclusions? She repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief, her hands planted firmly on her hips as she stared him down like he was something she had scraped off the bottom of her shoe. Mike, the only thing anyone in this backyard is jumping to right now is the realization that you're a liar, a cheat, and a thief. Mike's jaw tightened, his hands clenching at his sides as he glanced around the yard, searching for any ounce of sympathy, any friendly face willing to defend him. But he found none. The same people who had laughed at his jokes, who had entertained his self-important monologues at every family event, were now either staring at him in disgust or pretending they had never been associated with him at all. And then Linda, because she was done playing the fool, did something that made the entire situation even worse for him. She pulled her phone out of her pocket, tapped the screen a few times, and then held it up for everyone to see. "You really think I just found out about this tonight?" she asked, her voice steady, unwavering, the voice of a woman who had been waiting for this moment. "You think I walked in here completely clueless, waiting for some dramatic reveal like a goddamn soap opera? No, Mike. I've known for months." The silence that followed was thick with confusion and curiosity, the entire family now shifting their attention to the phone in Linda's hand, trying to piece together what she meant. Mike's face lost what little color it had left. "What the hell are you talking about?" he asked, his voice quieter now, less defensive, more afraid. Linda didn't even look at him as she scrolled through something on her screen, her lips curving into a smirk that was sharper than any knife. "I hired a private investigator," she said simply, the words dropping into the air like a bomb. "I have proof of everything. Every lie, every betrayal, every disgusting little secret you thought you were so clever at hiding." Mike actually stumbled back a step, his entire body tensing as if she had physically hit him, his breathing suddenly uneven, his entire world now crashing down around him in ways he had never expected. "You're lying," he said, but even he didn't sound convinced. Linda just raised an eyebrow, tapped the screen one more time, and then turned the phone around so that everyone could see. And that was when the real chaos started. The first picture was of Mike in a hotel lobby, his arm draped around a woman who was very clearly not Linda. The second was of him entering a bar, his hand resting a little too low on the back of another woman's dress. The third was of him sitting in his car, his face illuminated by the screen of his phone, texting someone late at night, the caption below the image showing the exact time and date, proving he had lied about his whereabouts on multiple occasions. A collective murmur spread through the backyard, shocked gasps and quiet whispers overlapping as people took in the evidence, as they processed the fact that this wasn't just speculation anymore. This was real. Undeniable proof that Mike had been deceiving Linda for a long, long time. Mike turned back to me, his expression filled with something that almost looked like pleading, like he was silently begging me to step in, to defuse the situation, to somehow undo what had just been unleashed. But I just sipped my drink, letting the ice clink against the glass, watching as he finally faced the consequences of his own actions. Jake, who had remained silent up until now, suddenly took a step forward, his face twisted with a mixture of anger and betrayal. "So this is who you really are?" he asked, his voice shaking with barely contained fury. "You didn't just cheat on Mom. You stole from our family. You lied to everyone. And for what? So you could keep pretending you were better than everyone else?" Mike didn't answer. He couldn't. There was nothing left to say. And then the final nail in the coffin came. Linda, still holding her phone, took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and looked him dead in the eye. "I spoke to your boss," she said, her voice calm, cold, cutting straight to the bone. "He knows about everything. Every financial mistake you've made. Every shady deal. Every lie you've told to cover your tracks." Mike froze, his entire body going rigid, his face twisting into something close to panic. Linda smirked. "You're not just losing your family, Mike," she said, slipping her phone back into her pocket. "You're losing everything." The backyard was dead silent as Linda turned and walked away for good, leaving Mike standing there, looking like a man who had just realized he had no future left to run to. For a moment, I thought that was the end of it, that the destruction had reached its peak, that nothing else could possibly make this night any more chaotic than it already was. But then my phone buzzed in my pocket, and when I pulled it out, my breath caught in my throat. A new message. From an unknown number. We need to talk. I stared at the screen for a long moment before my eyes drifted to the name attached to the message. It was from Mike's mistress. The message sat on my screen, the words glowing against the darkened background, carrying a weight that I wasn't sure I was ready to deal with. We need to talk. It was short, simple, but there was something in it that made my stomach tighten, something that told me this wasn't over, that the chaos I had unleashed wasn't finished tearing through the wreckage just yet. The name attached to the message made my blood run cold, my fingers tightening around my phone as I read it again just to be sure. Linda's younger sister. Mike's mistress. I hesitated for a moment, considering my options, knowing full well that nothing good could come from answering, that I had already done enough damage for one night, that I could just ignore this and let it all burn on its own. But curiosity had always been my downfall, the need to know the full picture, to uncover every ugly little truth no matter how painful, and so, against my better judgment, I responded with a single word. Where? 20 minutes later, I found myself sitting in my car outside a quiet little diner on the edge of town, watching the neon sign flicker in the reflection of my windshield, my fingers tapping anxiously against the steering wheel. It wasn't long before I saw her step outside, her heels clicking against the pavement as she made her way toward me, her face unreadable, her expression a mix of indifference and something else I couldn't quite place. She slid into the passenger seat without a word, shutting the door behind her with a soft click, her gaze flicking toward me before she exhaled heavily, like she had been carrying the weight of something unbearable for far too long. "I'm not here to apologize," she said finally, her voice sharp, firm, as if she had already anticipated my reaction. "So if you're expecting some tearful confession, you're going to be disappointed." I let out a dry, humorless laugh, shaking my head as I turned to face her fully, the dim glow of the diner's lights casting shadows across her face. "Trust me, an apology is the last thing I'm expecting from you," I said, my voice even, controlled, though there was a sharp edge beneath it that I didn't bother trying to hide. "So why the hell did you want to meet?" She hesitated then, her fingers drumming lightly against her knee, a sign of nervousness that she was trying to suppress. "Because you think you did something big tonight," she said, her tone matter-of-fact, her eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "But you don't know half of what Mike has done." A cold knot formed in my stomach at her words, my grip tightening on the steering wheel as I processed what she had just said, as the implication of it settled over me like a thick, suffocating fog. "What the hell does that mean?" I asked, my voice quieter now, my heart pounding just a little harder than before. She leaned back against the seat, her gaze shifting toward the windshield, watching the lights from passing cars streak across the glass. "It means," she said slowly, deliberately, like she was savoring the moment before she dropped the final bombshell, "that everything you exposed tonight, the cheating, the stolen money, the lies, that's nothing compared to the real secret he's been keeping." My breath caught in my throat, my entire body tensing as I waited for her to continue, dreading whatever words were about to come out of her mouth. "He has another family," she said finally, her voice flat, emotionless, like she had rehearsed the sentence 1,000 times before finally saying it out loud. "A whole other life. A wife. Kids. They live in another state. He's been balancing both for years." For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at her as my mind tried to make sense of what I had just heard, as if replaying it in my head over and over would somehow make it less insane. But it didn't. It only made it worse. The air inside the car felt suddenly suffocating, thick with the weight of something far bigger than I had ever anticipated, something so twisted and grotesque that it made everything that had happened at the barbecue feel almost insignificant in comparison. I shook my head, letting out a sharp breath as I ran a hand through my hair, my thoughts racing at 100 miles an hour. Jesus Christ, I muttered, more to myself than to her, my stomach twisting painfully at the realization that this wasn't just a man cheating on his wife, that this wasn't just a case of betrayal and greed. This was something else entirely. This was a man who had spent years living a lie so massive, so intricate, that it defied all logic, all reason. I turned back to her, my heart still hammering in my chest, my mind already calculating my next move. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, narrowing my eyes at her, trying to gauge whether she had some ulterior motive, whether this was just another layer of manipulation in an already tangled web of deceit. She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head as she reached for the door handle, her expression unreadable once again. "Because I wanted to see your face when you realized you didn't actually destroy him tonight," she said, her tone laced with something almost smug, almost satisfied. "You just cracked the surface." And with that, she opened the door, stepped out into the cool night air, and walked away without another word, leaving me alone with a truth so heavy, so monstrous, that I wasn't sure what to do with it. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty seat beside me, my mind swirling with possibilities, with choices, with the realization that I now held something even more powerful than I had before. I could end him completely if I wanted to. I could make sure that everyone knew exactly what kind of man he really was. I could shatter whatever was left of his world with a few well-placed words. But for the first time that night, I hesitated. Because as I sat there, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, I realized something that sent a strange, unexpected sense of satisfaction through me. I had walked into that barbecue as the family's black sheep, the one they all pitted, the one they mocked for being single, the one they looked down on as if I was somehow missing out on something grand. But now, I was the only one without secrets. I stepped out of the car, inhaling the crisp night air, letting it fill my lungs as I glanced back at the glowing lights of the diner, at the figure of Mike's mistress disappearing into the distance, at the road stretching out ahead of me, leading me away from all of it. I smirked to myself, the ghost of a laugh escaping my lips as I whispered, "Guess I'll die alone with my cats. But at least I won't die a liar." And with that, I walked away, leaving the final secret behind me, not knowing if I would ever decide to let it out, not knowing if I even needed to. Because sometimes, just knowing the truth is enough.